So I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to the symposium today. We're going to change up the order of events from normal, if you've been at previous symposia, and I'll introduce myself next. First, today, I would like to introduce Bill Logan, one of our co-chairs, who is going to lead us in the singing of our national anthem. So I'm going to ask if you would stand, if you are able, and to join us when Bill leads us off.
Thank you. Okay, well, that's nice. We'll start with a humming. Okay. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Yep.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. I think that was a most fitting start to today. So welcome to the 21st Annual Symposium offered by the Senior College of the University of Toronto. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Patricia Brubaker, and I'm honored to serve as the principal of Senior College. Senior College is an academic home for retired faculty and librarians. But today, in particular, we welcome all individuals who enjoy being intellectually stimulated. And today will indeed be stimulating, with an exciting program that deals with some of the challenges that our wonderful country is currently facing during these unusually tumultuous times, and hence our singing of O Canada to bring everyone together on this topic. I'd first today like to acknowledge the wonderful leadership of the Symposium Committee that put together this stellar program today. And their names are here. If everyone on the committee could just raise your hands so people can see who was involved in this. You see? But in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Bill Logan, whom you just met, and Margaret Proctor. Margaret and Bill have served as the co-chairs of the Symposium Committee for longer than I've been with Senior College, which admittedly is only a few years. But I think this year they've absolutely outdone themselves in working with the committee to put together a program. So I'm extremely grateful to both of you. Thank you. We are also very grateful to our donors for sponsoring this event today, Harvey Callis, Mosaic, and Del Manor, and there will be some tables in the lunchroom at the back, or the buffet hall, so to speak. And I would encourage you to visit their booths during the coffee breaks or during lunch to see what they are bringing to the table today. And of course, acknowledge the land on which we stand today. So.
Oh, wait. Well, it's my honor to introduce the first speaker. You've got some information on your symposium sheet, but I'll tell you a little bit more. The Honorable Bob Ray is the visitor of Massey College and a distinguished fellow at the Munk School of the University of Toronto, as well as a founding chairman at the Forum of Federations and a Matthews Fellow in Public Policy at Queen's University. He served as Ontario's first premier, 21st premier, interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, and Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. We are both honored and pleased that he will be opening our symposium on Canada at the Crossroads with his insights and thoughts on our world turned upside down. We look forward to the expert advice on what crossroads we should take. Honorable Ray.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back at the faculty club and to be in the presence of so many former faculty and former staff of the university. I was just calculating as I was waiting to speak, writing down how many members of my family have graduated from the University of Toronto, how many degrees does the Ray family have, and the answer is 11. Something of which I'm extremely proud. The university, first of all, was a real start for my father. My father, Saul, came to the university from Jarvis Collegiate in 1932, and he had an introductory meeting with the registrar, and his mother, my grandmother, was with him, and she was making the case to the registrar that we didn't have any money, but we hoped that he would still be able to go to the university. And the registrar said, "Mrs. Ray, if you just leave for a second, I'd like to talk to your son by himself." So he had the wonderful conversation with my dad, and he got a bursary that let him stay at the university. And I can't tell you how transformative that experience was for him, because it took him from a position of being very uncertain as to where he would be in the world to one where eventually he graduated in 1936, went on to the London School of Economics, thanks to the generosity of Vincent Massey, in whose college I now have the privilege of being the visitor. And that led to his career, and it led to my life as well, to the life of all my children. So the university is a very special place to me, and I am delighted to be able to now, at this phase in my life, however long that lasts, to be able to give back a bit more, to teach students and be a mentor and do the kind of thing that I really enjoy doing. And I'm very, very happy to have the opportunity to do that here and in this university, as well as some others that have been kind enough to ask me to do some stuff. So I'm busy, but I'm very happy to be making the University of Toronto my home once again, and it's great to be back. I just want to make sure that everyone appreciates sufficiently the fact that I will not be using PowerPoints. This is this is not to denigrate anyone else who uses PowerPoints, but it is only to say that in my experience of public speaking and of teaching, the trouble with PowerPoints is it makes everyone look at the screen and no one's listening to what you're saying. So I'm inflicting on you the need to focus on me, and I'm on this camera here and connecting by Zoom to whoever else is listening. And just for us to be able to have a dialogue and a conversation. There will be a presentation, but there will also be a chance for questions and answers, and disagreements, refutations, corrections, and whatever else people would like to provide. The title, "The World Turned Upside Down," is not original to me. It's been a phrase used to describe many great events in history. It was the title of one of my teachers and mentors, Christopher Hill, a historian at Oxford, who was the master of my college when I was a student at Balliol, who wrote a history of the English Civil War called "The World Turned Upside Down." And that really was the case, that for a period of 20 years, England went into a period of chaos, and where every possible idea about the way that the world should be was contested, disagreed with. People not only lost their heads figuratively, but King Charles lost his head in exact time. So how does that apply to today? Well, in my view, it applies in this sense, that from basically 1945 onwards, but really in a period leading up to 1945, there were certain key assumptions around American and other policies that led us to think that we were living in a world where there were certain rules of the game and certain ways in which things would be done, with exceptions and imperfectly and lots of other uncertainties. But that in the last few years, it's become clear that those certainties are all shot to hell, to use a technical phrase that I think we would all understand. It doesn't mean the old architecture is gone completely. It doesn't mean it's been totally destroyed, but it means that it's really not as much a sense of certainty about where we would be as opposed to now. How did this happen? Well, first of all, let's look at the architecture and how it happened, certain dates along the way. The first one, which you might find a little odd for me to talk about, but it is one date in 1940, when in the town of Ogdensburg in New York, Canada and the United States signed a very brief agreement where essentially Canada agreed that its defense arrangements would be allied directly with the United States. One other country was quite upset at the fact that the Ogdensburg Agreement was signed, and that was the United Kingdom. Because for Britain, it was the first indication of, well, wait a minute, Canada's always been part of our empire, our security arrangements, and we want to be number one with Canada, we want Canada to be number one with us. And we said, well, no, for the purposes of where we are right now, in terms of the continent and the things we need to do together, it is important for Canada and the United States to be working very closely together. Remember, we had entered the war, the United States had not yet entered the war. We still signed the agreement. A year later, in August of 1941, Churchill and Roosevelt met on a boat just off the coast of Newfoundland to sign a document called the Atlantic Charter. The late Peter Russell, one of my mentors, and I'm sure an active member of this group, because there was no group of which Peter was not an active member. If he was a member, he was an active member. And Peter was a wonderful teacher of mine and a wonderful scholar. And Peter has written a little book on the Atlantic Charter, and he also was one of the people who organized a regular trek to the coast of Newfoundland, where we would commemorate the significance of the Charter. The Charter was an interesting document and it is an interesting document, because it really anticipates much of what happened later. And essentially, it was a decision by Churchill wanted his goal in life, after he took office in 1940, his goal in life was to get the Americans on his side in every possible way he could. That was his one objective. He knew that without the Americans in the war against Hitler, there was no prospect of success. That was a sine qua non that had to be there. Roosevelt, on the other hand, was in a difficult spot. He had just been elected for the third time. I just would say sotto voce, Donald, please don't get any ideas about that thing. And he had to do a very careful balancing act. Instinctively, he knew that the United States' interests and values lay with the United Kingdom and with the fight against fascism. He knew that. But he also knew that he'd had to win an election by saying, don't worry, we're going to do what we can to make sure that the United States stays, there won't be troops sent overseas. We're going to be doing what we can to keep that balance. Because isolationism was a huge factor in American politics right through this period. So, very cleverly, because Roosevelt was extremely clever, he said, let's work on a document that, in a sense, ties the United Kingdom to a change in its own outlook about what this war needs to be about. It can't be about simply defending Great Britain. It has to be about defending values and interests. Oh, by the way, they happen to be our interests and our values. But we want to make sure the UK says, okay, we can understand what we're trying to say. So without going into the details, but when you actually look at the document, and I hope some of you will just at some point Google Atlantic Charter and just see what it says, because it's really interesting. Because what it sets out is a set of principles about free trade, about the rule of law, about the importance of self-government, a phrase which Churchill was very afraid of because it would mean the end of the empire. He didn't want that, but in the end he had to put up with it. And a series of agreements about what this war was really about. And as it turned out, a few short months after they signed the Atlantic Charter, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, which meant that from Roosevelt's perspective, the U.S. was at war, and then Germany declared war on the United States. It's important to remember that the United States did not declare war on Germany. Germany declared war on the United States. And that's what led to the full flow of the war and further agreements and further meetings, which were intended to try to set up what does the post-war architecture look like. And for Roosevelt, he wanted the post-war architecture to look like the kind of architecture he had been trying to build in the United States. And you really have to say that you know, to understand the New Deal, to understand all it was that Roosevelt was trying to do, this was really an attempt to bring the United States out of its isolation into its world responsibilities and its global responsibilities. And at the same time, to tie the Brits and the French and everyone else into an organization and an approach and a way of looking at things that would be based on coherent values that he could justify and he could explain to the American people. That's how we got the United Nations. And tragically, Roosevelt died before the dream was completed because he died in April of 1945, and the charter was signed in San Francisco in May, but he knew what was in it before he died. And while that world is, you could say, well, it was very imperfect, you know, there was nothing, it was all based, a lot of it was based on American power, we call it today hegemony. I spent a long time learning what a Pokemon was. Now I have to learn what a hegemon is. It's complicated, but they're different. And as we look at what's happened, we need to understand that the assumption of much of what we have done as a country and the assumption of what others have done as countries through NATO, through all of the alliances, through all of the agreements, whether it's in trade, dealing with every conceivable issue that you can think of, the assumption has been the United States would be there, imperfectly, because there's some things they didn't join. The United States, most notably, did not join the International Criminal Court. So I won't go through all the story of what happened in the years in between, except to say that the assumptions that we could share values with the United States, that we could share interests with the United States, and that led to the free trade agreement and so on, that assumption has been completely undercut. I think I used the phrase shot to hell. I'll stick with that phrase because we need to understand how fundamentally that's broken. And that's what the Prime Minister meant in his famous Davos speech where he talked about the rupture. What was the rupture? That was the rupture. The rupture was, in a sense, that the house that Franklin built is falling apart. And we were part of that house. We were quite comfortably a part of that exercise. And I could go through other examples of where, at Suez, for example, Lester Pearson was working hand in glove with the American administration to ensure that the Brits and the French and the Israelis got the word that what you're trying to do is not going to happen. It's not on. It's not going to take place. And all of these examples of where that's been, where that's taken us. And so we're now left, and is it only President Trump that's responsible for this? No. But Trump is one major disruptor. So let me try and describe some major disruptors that are turning things in a different direction. Certainly the shift in position of the United States under President Trump is a major disruptor that we're having to cope with, because it's not only affecting other countries and other situations, it's directly affecting our relationship with the United States, which we allowed to become one where we got what we thought was a good deal on free trade, which, by the way, I was not an advocate of free trade in the 1980s when it happened. And it also, I think, speaks to the fact that President Trump's target is not only NATO or the United Nations or U.S. aid or anything else. It's also Canada, and so we are now in his sights in a different way. Most days, like you really don't know. You have to recognize. She sort of. I wake up every morning and as I look at myself, I know you're not supposed to look at your cell phone or first thing, but I do. And as I look at it, I say, "Oh my God, what's he done? What's he said last? What did he say overnight? But you can imagine how his staff feel. What has he done overnight? Like, what did he say? It's getting crazier and crazier. But it is a significant source of disruption for us. The second major long-term disruption to our lives is climate change, which is now being forgotten, but is still critically important. The third major disruptor is AI and artificial intelligence and what that is doing to our world and to our consciousness, to our way of being and acting. I'm about to go back into the classroom, and I'm going to be fascinated to see how do we manage students having access to artificial intelligence, which replaces, allegedly, natural stupidity. And so we'll see how that works. I'm going to be very interested in exploring this with people. How does it work? The other major kind of disruptor or trend line, which is still underway and deeply impactful, is the trend line of the evolution of capitalism and the evolution of imperialism. Because both of these forces in the world were very much what created the 20th century universe in which people operated. And now we're seeing it having different elements. And of course, this is linked to the rise of China and the impact that China is having on the global economy, which is a long-term trend. Started really in 1980, with the election of Deng Xiaoping, and is now carrying on in a major and dramatic way under not a collective leadership, but the individual dictatorship of President Xi. But the impact of China globally, I saw it every day in the UN. So let me just close by saying that the example that struck me personally, sort of affected me very much, was the relationship between Canada and the United States as I experienced it at the UN. I was there at the end of Trump in 2020 when we saw the transition to Biden during the Biden administration, and then with the return of President Trump. And I don't think we should sort of feel that the Americans under Biden were perfect, and then suddenly it was everything they were trying to do was disrupted. Not at all. For a long time, the Americans have been skeptical about the United Nations. They have been a little bit in, but a lot out. They're out of the International Criminal Court. They're extremely ambivalent on the issue of the question of how the rule of law actually operates. They see themselves as an exceptional country, a country that is based on the rule of law in their own way, but they don't want anyone else to interpret what that means as far as they are concerned. And so there's this constant effort to pull themselves away from anything that would smack of subjecting the United States to the rules that apply to everybody else. That's not only a Republican thing. That's a very deeply ingrained. There's a moment in time when President Obama said publicly, "America is not an exceptional country," and boy, did he pull back from that one, because that was outside the frame of what was seen as being politically acceptable. The big change that happened, though, which was a dramatic change, there were two. One was the dramatic slashing and really destruction of the entire U.S. development and U.S. aid structure in the world. And I cannot overemphasize how disruptive that was in a very short space of time. Billions of dollars were taken out of the system. Tens of billions of dollars were taken out of the system. And that has had a devastating impact on many, many projects and other things that were underway. And the other one was Ukraine. My view of the Ukrainian conflict has been for some time that we have allowed this conflict to endure as long as we have because we've not been prepared to take the deeper steps that would be required to actually allow Ukraine to succeed. And we did that because there was, among many policymakers in many countries, there was a profound concern that if we did too much, it would destabilize Russia, and we didn't want to do that, apparently. So we need to understand that there's been a deliberate structure created under which President Zelensky has been forced to fight with at least one hand tied behind his back, and sometimes two. And what is a miracle, really a miracle, is that the Ukrainians have stuck with it and have said, well, if that's the way what they're going to do, we're going to innovate. So the Ukrainians have created a resilience to the Russian invasion that is remarkable. And I think the more we learn of it, the more we understand it, we can see how genuinely remarkable it is. When Trump was elected, it became clear. You remember that famous the humiliation session that took place at the White House? It became clear that this was a different United States. This was a country that was prepared to humiliate a leader who everybody else thought was an amazing fighter for freedom and an amazing fighter for the integrity and sovereignty of his country. And there was every year, I'm speaking on a little too long, but there was every year a process that the UN went through. Because the Security Council couldn't succeed in dealing with Ukraine because of the Russian veto in the Security Council, all of the big debates on Ukraine actually happened in the General Assembly. But the Americans came to us and said, remember it was in February, and said, you know those debates that we have every year that leads up to the anniversary of the invasion? You're one of the signatories and you're one of the movers of this thing. we would like you to withdraw that resolution, and we will put forward a resolution in the Security Council instead. And I said, well, what is the resolution of the Security Council going to say? And it says, well, it looks like this. And they showed us a draft. And I said, well, you've taken everything, any meat out of the sandwich so you could get the Russians to agree to it. And it means nothing. And we're not going to abandon the Ukrainians. That's not our position. And they said, well, do you not think you need instructions on this? I said, no, I don't think I do need instructions. Well, I'll get them, but I don't think I really need them, because I know what the government of Canada thinks on this issue. It's very clear. And I suspect the Europeans will feel the same way, and it would all be there. So there was this really very straight disagreement with the United States on what had been a joined-up position of Western countries, NATO, Canada, and the United States, for most of the period after the invasion of Ukraine. And that was undermined and destroyed. And the Americans actually, having asked us to withdraw the motion, and we didn't, they said, fine, we'll vote against your resolution. So on that day, and on the big screen at the UN that you could see behind the speaker, like behind me here, there'd be a big screen where ultimately the votes go up, and you see where your country is and how you voted. It was a moment in time when I looked at that screen and I turned to my team and said, okay, this is the day the world turned upside down. Because this is the day that the Americans voted with the Russians, the Belarusians, the North Koreans, go down the list. And you say, this is some weird alliance that's been created that's completely different from the configuration we've ever seen before. And this is how the world has changed in that geopolitical sense. So when you look at all the ways in which the world has changed, it is, I think, the discussions today, in seeing the particular ways in which our trade relationship with the United States, in which our defense relationship with the United States, in which our strategic relationship with Europe, in which our relationship with other countries is being so subject to change and flux and movement. And we are trying to reclaim and maintain a level of sovereignty at a moment in time when we have a president who doesn't believe that Canada should be a sovereign nation. And when people say to me, oh, he doesn't really mean that, I said, look, if he says it once, you can say it's a joke. If he says it 552 times, then you might think this is actually a serious objective of his presidency, that unless we figure out how to resist it, he will continue to push for it. And I could talk about this more in the questions and answers as to how do we do that exactly. But I think there's also been something dramatic in how the world, in our case, can turn right side up. Without being too partisan, because I certainly wouldn't want to inflict that on anybody here, I think we have come together as Canadians in quite a remarkable way in some important instances. One is to say we don't want to lose our country. We believe in our national project. We believe in what it means to be a Canadian. We want our country to remain independent and sovereign and integral. But while that is a consensus, the question of, well, what are you prepared to pay to do that? How much are you prepared to put forward to make sure that's maintained? How much are we actually prepared to do in order to ensure that that's the kind of position that we can take? And I think that's a debate that we will see going forward. Things will become a little clearer as some of the elements of the package come in front of everyone, and people say, well, okay, but there will have to be several days of reckoning when people understand that if we are in this kind of a world where we don't have the easy umbrellas that we had before to provide us with security, that in turn means that we're going to have to be on our own with others, but on our own and more, and willing to do and pay more. And I know one of your speakers is going to be talking about healthcare, and I can't anticipate exactly what she's going to say, except to say that anyone who thinks that we are going to do all the things that the governments are telling us need to be done without paying a higher price for it are sadly mistaken. It's going to cost us money, it's going to cost us effort, and it's going to cost us a recognition that we're not living in easy times. And so as we get used to this challenge, we should be prepared to do it. Last word is, we are going to succeed as a country. I'm quite convinced that we can do it, and that we have the ability, we have the institutions, we have the people, we have the strength to do it. We just have to convince ourselves that we can, and I think a lot of people in the rest of the world are looking to us to see how we are able to respond to this particular challenge. Thank you very much. It's good to talk to you this morning. I look forward to your questions.